letters, and we talked about it on the phone. But how you really feel about it, I don't really know.
What's your take on Cassavetes? 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 Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on Cassavetes?
Welcome to There's Sometimes a Buggy, Irresponsible Opinions About Classic Film. I'm Elise.
I am Dave. We're here this week to discuss the Hollywood Studios Year by Year, our ongoing series devoted to the studio age. This time out, RKO Radio Pictures, 1931. We're going to be talking about Kept Husbands and Lonely Wives.
These are two films that we chose for no reason except for their ridiculous titles going well together.
A felicitous connubial pairing here.
These movies were about as ridiculous as I thought they were going to be, but a little bit crazier.
I was quite pleased, I must say.
That's great.
So we're going to have a lot to talk about, and stay with us afterwards for a fairly lengthy discussion of our cinema-going activities out and about in Toronto this week.
So,
Kept Husbands.
Kept Husbands. This is the one that mostly was... Well, it kind of went back and forth between comedy and melodrama. It definitely threw a curveball. When anticipating this episode, we were asking whether RKO could continue its unbroken streak, meaning two movies that we watched for 1930, as the feminist studio, and it definitely did not.
No.
With Kept Husbands, which is a perfectly typical making the liberated woman behave male emasculation plot, with the difference being that at least there's a class difference here, and she's not asked to give up a job at the end, just some society hijinks, but still, it's a pretty disappointing ending, and kind of follows a bit of a Woman of the Year trajectory that's not pleasant. But that said, it does seem to be a movie that is divided against itself, both as to what genre it belongs to, and as to whether or not to hate the heroine.
Yeah, that's what I loved about it. I thought it was really fascinating. It had some strange contradictions built into it.
Definitely.
Some scenes that definitely don't feel like they belong to the didactic purpose.
And that is, in fact, served by the ending.
Yeah.
But it kept me guessing right up until the ending. It seemed like it was going to subvert itself.
It did, yeah.
And then it didn't, but...
So this one was directed by Lloyd Bacon, who is not primarily known as an RKO director. He's a Warner Brothers contract director throughout most of the 30s and into the 40s. A comedy ace, that's what he was known for.
Okay. Well, this does seem like a melodrama that at certain points the creators decided it was so stupid that they needed to turn the scenes into comedy.
Yeah, and those are the best scenes.
Yeah.
It stars Dorothy McHale, who is fantastic.
Yeah, and she was apparently a big silent star, or a decent size of silent star, up and coming toward the end of the 20s.
Well, throughout the second half of the 20s, I think. She was a big star, and she's best known today, I think, for the cult classic Safe in Hell.
Oh, which we watched.
Yeah.
It was watchable.
She's amazing in that movie. I remember being a little disappointed with the overall film, although we'll have to watch it again someday.
Well, it was just like a never-ending nightmare of rape threat.
Yeah. But anyway, she is...
The less fun side of the pre-code era.
She is terrific in this movie as well, I think, and she's paired with Joel McCrea, who would go on to a much longer career than hers. He acted all the way into the 60s and beyond, I think.
In this movie, he's mostly just likable and very, very handsome.
Yeah, that was what he was doing most of the time in the early 30s.
Until Preston Sturges got his hands on him, or?
No, he gets some other chances before that, but sure, Preston Sturges used him to best effect.
I was just marveling at his gorgeous semi-pompadour. His gorgeous locks. throughout this movie, and so is she.
Yes, she's quite impressed with him. And the other really, well, there are a lot of good performers in it, but the other standout for me is Ned Sparks.
Of course.
One of the great character actors of the 30s.
Is he an actor? He seems more like a comedian who delivers non sequiturs in his inimitable style.
I don't really know what his thespian credentials are. Yeah, he often turns up to do this kind of thing. We know him best probably from Imitation of Life and Gold Diggers in 1933.
Right.
But never fails to amuse me. Here he plays the lodger who also works at the steel mill with Joel McCrea in a kind of subservient role.
When he first showed up and they're just there in her living room talking over life for 30 seconds, I thought he was Joel McCrea's father. And I couldn't get oriented again until that was resolved.
The genetics don't make a lot of sense there, no. Ned Sparks, one of Canada's greatest personalities.
Well, it was interesting. RKO is looking a little primitive, but I mean, it could just be the particular titles that we chose. We don't know, but compared to where the other studios have gone in 1931, RKO is now looking a little primitive, soundstage bound.
I think a lot of it is just a fluke that we chose two farces that were going to be filmed almost as if it was on stage. Although I think there are some pretty cool shots in Kept Husbands.
Well,
anyway.
I mean, not just Kept Husbands, but there's obviously trick photography in Lonely Wives. They must have done that stuff for comedies in the silent era already.
Yeah.
But anyhow, combining it with sound couldn't have been easy.
But the shots of the steel plant I thought were pretty great. There was some interesting kind of cinema verite looks at a busy industrial whirlwind occasionally, but most of it is set in upper class homes.
So as I was saying, it starts with a bang, with plot just being blankly introduced in this upper class home with a conversation between the family members.
Andrew Carnegie, I guess. This is supposed to be the biggest steel magnate in the world.
He's a self-made billionaire.
He is relating to his family the story of a daring rescue effected at one of his plants. The hero of this mission is Joel McCrea. Well, we don't know that yet. We just know he's a working stiff who went far above the call of duty and is being rewarded with potentially a check for $1,000 if he will accept it, and dinner at the president's house. President of the company, not of the country, but it's almost the same thing. The women of the family are disgusted with the whole suggestion.
They keep talking about overalls.
And that he will just do everything wrong. It'll be embarrassing for both sides, I guess, but primarily for them. They just don't want to see a working man or be reminded that anyone has to do work anywhere.
And the father keeps telling them that this is not an ordinary working man in overalls. This is not Ned Sparks.
This is my steel boss.
What the hell is that? Like some kind of low-level manager, supervisor?
Yeah, sure.
But already Dorothy McHale, who is named Dorothea when her mother speaks of her, she's already very unpleasant in her snobbishness, but she's sassy and smart-mouthed and seems to have a good relationship with her dad, likable in that sense. We already understand how these plots go. We know she's going to be disabused of these notions right away, that the dad is right and they are wrong.
We skip right ahead to the dinner. Dorothy, or Dorothea, invites a kind of snide boyfriend of hers.
Her name is Dorothy Parker.
Yeah, which is crazy because Dorothy Parker, the writer, existed already and was well known to the public. So.
And was also well known to be a Marxist, wasn't she?
But she didn't spell her name this way, so that's a difference. Dorothea Parker will say she has invited this guy, this standard cad.
Who seems like he's gay. At least 50% of the time this is how these roles are played for some reason. You cannot believe this man is a sexual threat, and that becomes important later.
It does. Everyone sits down to dinner, and we basically skip straight to Joel McCrea.
In a suit, well-mannered, and gorgeous.
Yeah, overwhelming all of the objections they possibly could have had.
And she is just staring at him. I guess, ultimately, it proves to be because she recognizes him. It looks initially like erotic attraction.
And it is that, too. But at first, yeah, we don't know anything except that, and it's really crazy.
Yeah.
Like,
She can't pay attention to anything anyone is saying.
It's not like she's concealing this.
Completely confident.
Yeah, she is.
That's what is so winning about her.
Yeah. And so she finally steps across the table and says, "What's that pin that you've got there?" And pulls it out, and it's an all-American college pin. So it turns out this is not some usual working class guy. This is someone who presumably got a scholarship.
Yeah, a sports scholarship. But if this is what I was trying to figure out in terms of college and class at the time, if he has this college education, however he got it, because it's not because his parents could pay for it, why is he getting $45 a week or whatever he's complaining about?
It's because of his very strict code of honor, which forbids him from using the connections he made at college.
Yeah, but why can't he just use his college degree? Is that why he's a supervisor?
Yeah, exactly. And he's working on more. He's still going to school at night, he says. So he's trying to develop himself even further so he can earn more and more promotions. That's his plan. He's not going to climb the ladder the schmoozy way. And he turns down the $1,000 check because he says he didn't earn it. He saved that person because that's what any human would do. He's not going to ride to riches and fame just for doing something decent like that.
Right. So he's kind of a stick in the mud.
He's a Boy Scout, let's say. We're familiar with this kind of character. Usually they're not very fun, although Joel McCrea kind of specialized in making that kind of a guy sort of a fun character and appealing.
He's appealing.
Anyway.
I would not call him fun, but he's kind of sweet.
Yeah. It's not easy to play that kind of character, and Sturges made him do that kind of thing too, right? Like in Palm Beach Story, he's basically that. Everyone kind of has a changed attitude toward him, except for the mother, who's still grossed out by the whole idea. I guess
she must have married her husband after he already made his fortune.
I suppose so.
Or she's really trying hard to forget about whatever came before.
Well, we also hear later, Joel McCrea himself remarks that she has a faux mid-Atlantic accent that she can't really keep a handle on, right? So she doesn't want to be reminded, perhaps, of her middle-class origins.
Dorothy decides she wants this guy and she's going to get him, and the father says he has too much character for that, but we know that she gets what she wants.
She bets him it'll take 4 weeks and he'll be in the bag.
But then the heavy-handed Sternbergian Blue Angel couple appear, you know, like the clown and the Blue Angel, that heavy-handed symbolism of what's coming.
The kept husband.
The kept husband couple.
This is bad.
It's even worse than the Blue Angel, though, because they also say the title every time they appear.
This is where it veers crazily into didacticism.
And mad melodrama.
This guy was the most promising architect in their social circle, apparently, or maybe in America. He married a rich heiress who figures it's disgusting even to do architecture. So she made him give up all of that aspect of his life, and he just goes around with her and takes care of her dog. And he doesn't do that very well, so he gets screamed at in public fairly often.
It's obvious that neither of them are ultimately happy with this arrangement, even though she is the one who wanted it this way, right? She doesn't actually enjoy being married to a man that she has emasculated. The keeping wife, or whatever you'd call her, wants to emasculate her man and eat him too.
Yeah, exactly. Gotta keep the pressure coming from the other side. So, will that happen to Joel McCrea?
The Woman of the Year aspect is that despite this setup, they are actually very, very likable together as a couple initially, right? And that the movie ultimately betrays that.
It shows their rapport. It shows that they're having a great time, although he is giving in to her on every sticking point.
It's true.
He follows the code that would have been in vogue at the time, where if they're going to get married, they have to live on his salary and live within his means. That he gives up on, realizes she's not going to accept that.
It all seems very impossible because on the one hand, that's crazy. Why? Why would she give all of this up? That's absolutely crazy. But on the other hand, it doesn't really seem like any happy medium is possible. So it really does feel like they're doomed.
Yeah.
If she's going to insist on having a relationship with him, which she does, showing up at his work every day and taking him away from his work.
Yeah, that was a great scene where he is working on a rush job, figuring out some plans. It's got to be done within an hour. She comes by at at lunchtime. It is a reasonable time for him to go to lunch, but normally he would put lunch on hold until he's done this.
He'd do the Mike Bloomberg thing, right? No pee breaks, no nothing.
Not until the work is done. When his boss comes over and realizes that Big Boss's daughter wants to take Joel McCrea out for lunch, while he's like, oh, no problem, don't worry about it, we'll figure some other way. But he's really incensed. You see that he's angry as soon as she's out of sight.
And she does keep him out all afternoon.
Yeah, that's it for that plan.
And here's where it gets ugly in terms of gender, where any act of unconventionality on their part as a couple, where she takes a male role, like proposing to him in this scene, ultimately turns out to be part of the evil that has to be corrected at the end, even though it seems perfectly fun and innocent at the time.
Yeah, the movie doesn't present it as bad. It's like, okay, this is a cool girl. Everybody likes her. Eventually, it's saying that this got them off on the wrong foot. It prepared him to give in.
They redo the proposal at the end.
Yeah, they're starting fresh, and he's on top at that point.
So to speak.
But she doesn't make him quit his job. What she does do is she tells her dad, well, you gotta make him a vice president, raise his salary considerably, but even that's not gonna be good enough, really. There's gonna have to be lots of thousands of dollars that just get funneled to them with no real laundering of salary involved. Then she makes him go on a honeymoon that's just you would be fired if you tried to take this honeymoon if you weren't the boss's son-in-law.
It does make you ask yourself, what is her interest in this guy? Because she doesn't want him to... She's not interested in his character, which is what her dad's interested in. He's charismatic for her because she remembers him as a sports star, and he's good looking. Is there anything more to it than that? And yet, that isn't presented as evil, that would be the basis of her attraction, that it's kind of a whim.
Well, I think she does like the fact that he's resisting and he's trying to stick to his code. She finds that appealing, but she still can't help wanting to beat him and make him give it up.
Or not just that, but the conflict might be simply that, I already said it, she wants to have her cake and eat it too. She wants to be able to have this guy with all of his character, but with none of his stick-in-the-mud attributes, and it's just not possible.
No, unfortunately. She does have kind of a nice relationship with his mother, which is interesting.
She has here's where the text starts arguing with itself in a way that made the movie not coherent.
But that's better, because to have
or good, but interesting.
For it to be coherent, it would have had to have been a much worse movie, because then it would have had to be entirely didactic in character.
And in order to bring about the didactic ending, the mother character also gets thrown under the bus, basically.
Yeah.
With her final speech.
There are different ways to keep a husband.
So Mary Carr, the mother, is a sweet little old white-haired lady, like a Preston Sturges-style mother. She's just really nice and likable. What can you say? And the fact that she gets along with
Ned Sparks.
Well, no, I was going to say with Dorothy, seems to speak for Dorothy's character and for this ultimately working out somehow, although we don't see how.
Really sets you up for some cognitive dissonance throughout the film. And Ned Sparks is the voice of gloom and doom always, not just in this movie, but every time he appears. Especially welcome here, because it's the best possible way for the film to deliver its sermons, if it must have sermons, to give them to Ned Sparks.
Sure. Especially since his sermons don't make any sense, because they are just a bunch of cranky non sequiturs.
Things really come to a head, though. He finally manages to get them home, after they stayed way too long in Europe, for his tastes anyway.
He spent a lot of Dad's money.
We see an example of his day at work as vice president, which consists of him doing nothing, basically. He has a secretary who sits there and reads.
Well, he does, like crossword puzzles or something? Along those
bridge.
Lines? Bridge. He studies bridge for their social set.
That's the real job that he has, is to be a competent bridge player at night. So that was all the rage in 1931. That was the coolest possible thing to do in society.
To be on her arm.
And play bridge. Father intervenes at this point and reminds us all that he really did have plans for this guy in his organization.
Now this is a part where the movie gets really cruel. Because, first of all, it looks like the situation is going to be solved by him, even though he has been promoted under false premises.
Here he's going to show that he deserved it all along,
Right.
which we actually know anyway. Like, this is the kind of guy that would get promoted in a company.
If things were fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, and many years later. So it seems like the problem that they're having is going to be solved, number one. But then, of course, she needs to learn her lesson about having some compromise here. Ultimately, she does do that, how we will get to. So first of all, it seems like the problem is going to be solved one way, then there's a conflict, then it seems like that's going to be solved, instead of which they decide to go for the most conventional, ugliest ending possible, when there were two perfectly good solutions proposed by the plot.
Yeah. So he has to go to St. Louis to put over the biggest steel deal in the history of the corporation. Only he can be trusted with putting this over. It's an amazing opportunity, and of course, since he's going away for that long, he would like to bring his wife with him. He figures that'll be something she'll agree to. I don't know why he thinks that, but he does. She, meanwhile, has made plans to go to some stupid thing for the night, and that's the way the movie puts it, right? Like, society functions are definitely stupid, secondary things.
Except for the fact that afterwards, the thing that you never see in a movie like this is that the mother gives him a big lecture about, maybe her plans seemed important to her and you just rushed in there and tried to barrel over her. And
yeah, I agree. That was a great corrective. But the way it's presented at the time when he shows up and she's saying, but we're going to the what's and what's.
Yeah.
It's silliness.
Like big steel deals are not silliness.
Very silly.
At that point, it was, of course, reminding me of the Jezebel Battle of Wills, William Wyler's Jezebel.
So they really have it out here, and she puts her foot down and says, absolutely no way am I going, and neither should you.
And she has a tantrum, and his reservation that he expressed about her initially was that she is very spoiled, and so we're not entirely surprised when she acts this way, and I even thought that it was perfectly consistent for her to be like this cool, smart, independent girl, and then also have a tantrum when she's defied. That wasn't outside of the bounds of human psychology.
I think that made sense. Despondent, he goes to his mother's house and tells her basically his marriage seems to be over because he's going to go through with this steel deal and travel without her against her explicit wishes. And the mother, as you say, explains that this was really foolish of you to go in and insensitive of you to act as if her plans were meaningless and everything has to come second to Mann's imperatives, which are all economic, business related.
But then she makes the false prediction, or the slightly early prediction, that probably she's already worked this all out and understood that she was wrong and is waiting, all packed and waiting for you.
Yeah, but of course that's not the case. Instead, she's gotten on the phone to summon her snide friend.
Yeah, her snide friend who previously kissed her at a party, which she didn't take seriously at all, but Joel McCrea did.
Yes, and he ordered her never to do that again, and she said, fine, if you don't like it. I mean...
Give into you on that one, since I don't care about this guy.
Yeah,
anyway.
It doesn't mean that much to me. Everything else being equal, I would give out some kisses to people who aren't my husband. What's the problem?
Yeah, I've known him all my life, etc., etc. And it does seem like this is a guy that she was set up to marry.
Yeah.
Although he hasn't taken it that hard either.
No, he's fine.
This is a stretch where the movie defies our expectations the most.
I was getting whiplash, yeah.
Beginning with, she seems to be making the melodrama villain choice of she's going to go off with this flirty friend after she's been told not to do it by her husband, and she's going to... This does happen in Jezebel, and some kind of confrontation is going to be forced, or maybe, probably not, she'll actually commit adultery, or she's setting herself up to be raped. These are the choices that we have here. And it actually goes into a scene that is very reminiscent of the very, very sexist, misogynist ex-lady with Betty Davis that I've referred to a few times on this podcast because it was so scarring to see it, where the liberated woman is punished with the threat of rape, and that is how she is taught to behave.
Yeah, she's scared back into matrimony by the threat of rape from every single man who isn't her husband, who will now be looking to attack her.
But there's particularly a scene with someone she knows very well who's a playboy, and he locks the door on her and tries to rape her.
Yeah, because she's fair game at this point. She's damaged goods. The way it goes in this movie, that is the tour de force scene of the film, I think.
And to me, this played like they made this up on the spot.
Brilliant. So much fun.
The whole thing is calibrated so well for our movie watching, especially movies of this period, expectation, that I actually said out loud to you at a certain point, oh, now this is something like, this is the rape scene now. She's about to get raped.
And then she says that.
And then
basically.
she says it.
They do meta commentary as he chases her around the room.
Meta farce. And she's like, oh no, my honor and my virtue. Now I have to scream.
Yeah.
Like, and she just kind of, it's almost like she actually kids him out of rape mode. That's how it's played. It's like he was going to go through with this role and play this villain role until she kids him out of it.
Yeah, it's incredible. It really has to be seen to be believed.
And sprays him with a seltzer bottle to cool off. And at the end of it, they're just laughing like exactly what she says they are, which is, people who've been friends since childhood. Of course, your friends since childhood can rape you.
They can, yes.
But not if you spray them with a seltzer bottle and joke them out of it.
This movie had other plans for that scene. I'm glad it did. Now, Joel McCrea, as soon as he finds out that the phone is busy when he tries to call to make up, that's it. His plans are on hold for St. Louis because he's a very jealous husband. He goes home and just waits for her the entire evening and well into the morning hours. I guess he's gonna have to get new tickets. He finds out that the party that she went to broke up long ago. She was supposed to go to a country club, so he knows that she's not there. He finds out in the morning paper that people who set up that party were arrested or something. He's got that to point to when she tries to bring it out as her alibi.
Right, because she's just... How could she possibly explain how this scene went? By the way, we didn't mention that at the end of this scene is when she has joked her own self into the realization that, yeah, I've been an asshole and I should probably go home with my husband instead of fooling around with this idiot.
Everything could have resolved right there.
Yeah.
They could have made a separate piece there and just gone to St. Louis and sold the steel and everything would have been fine. But instead, the script takes us into these much more standard waters of him exposing her lie.
But it keeps fighting. It keeps fighting itself right up until that final scene.
Yeah.
Because the father finds out, I don't know what, that he's going to resign, end their marriage and resign as vice president.
Well, that's after this confrontation between them.
Yeah. And then the father comes barreling into the house first thing in the morning, wakes her up, and delivers a Jezebel-type speech about how has a rotten, corrupt soul and she's destroyed him, and he's gonna, and makes us believe that he's about to go kill himself. But she does stand up for herself.
Yeah.
Like this whole movie is like this whole scene is absolutely nuts because he delivers a speech. Then she says, it's your own fault, and you're just sticking together because you're a man. It's your own fault, obviously, because I am this way because you're my father.
Come to expect all these wonderful things in my life because of the money that our family has, and that's true. But then
he insists that she's going back into the marriage, and then she just screams about it like a brat. Then finally we get the sexist resolution. The patriarchal, heteronormative resolution.
Everyone kind of comes to their senses and decides that they're going to behave the way they're expected to behave by the society of this time. Joel McCrea does not go to oblivion and drink himself into a stupor. He also never descends to the level of the kept husband that we found as the negative example. He says, no, I'm going to St. Louis, I'm going to make this sale for you, and then I'm quitting, because that's what a man would do. He gets on the train the next morning. The father kind of anticipates this. After searching everywhere else, in every gin joint and flop house in the city and prison, he's not there, so that means he must have come to his senses. Mm-hmm. So he's like, I know where we can find him. He'll be at the train station to go to St. Louis. And that is how Joel McCrea finds Dorothy McHale in his cabin with him. She lets him propose.
And says that we're going to live on your salary.
Which will be a high salary, actually, at this point. So it's not going to be that.
But not what she was expecting.
No more $10,000 codes, probably.
Right. There's nothing about this movie and the studio online at all to give me any indication of why anybody thought it was a good idea to make it. It does read like a movie that someone was told to make, someone like Lloyd Bacon, and decided this is incredibly stupid and it's not even going to play, so we're going to enliven it and make it fight against itself to make it somewhat more interesting.
It's a weird movie for RKO to have made. Dorothy McHale was a Warner's contract player, so they borrowed her for this. Joel McCrea, I don't really know if he was under contract to anyone at this point.
Yeah, but we saw him in the Silver Horde last time.
Yeah, he may have had an RKO contract at that point. Turns up kind of all over the place in the 30s. He's in a lot of Samuel Goldwyn movies in the late 30s. I've never been 100% sure of what his contract status was at different times. Seems like I guess he was initially an RKO player.
So yeah, we don't know why they did this. thing. But they did it in a fairly interesting way.
For that one scene...
Obviously, because it's not a good type of scene. That's the best version of that scene I've ever seen.
Well, it's a great scene because it's a completely, to the core, ironized version of the kind of scene that it is. So it's not even that kind of scene at all.
And the kind of scene that it is one of the foulest kinds of scene that there is. So
Yeah.
it really deserves what it gets here.
Magnificent.
Punishment rape as a melodrama trope.
And of course, none of that happens. So,
Yeah.
great.
On to...
Lonely Wives was actually made by Pathé. Warner Brothers, you'll see throughout the early 30s, some of them are called Warner Brothers Pictures
Yeah.
and some of them are called First National, but they all go under the studio imprimatur,
Now,
right?
all I could find out about Pathé during this period is that they were known for comedy shorts.
Well, they made the original Holiday with Everett Horton, so I guess he was a Pathé player.
So Wikipedia says that in 1928, Pathé merged with Keith Elby Orpheum Theaters, along with Producers Distributing Corporation, to create what would eventually come to be known as RKO Radio Pictures. And in that period, production of short subjects credited to American Pathé increased to a whole bunch under the nameplates Manhattan Comedies, Campus Comedies, etc. And featured players were people like Franklin Pangborn,
Oh, great.
Thelma White, Buck and Bubbles, and Alan Hale, later of Warner Brothers.
Ah.
So they were known for comedy.
I actually have a personal connection to Pathé because there was a Pathé studio in Montreal where they did some kind of filming. I don't know if it was in French or English because they were a French company as well. And it was just 2 blocks from the place I lived in Notre-Dame-de-Grâce for several years near Vendôme Metro.
Now, obviously, by the time you were born in the 70s, they were not
No.
making films there anymore.
No, but
Just-
it still had the word Pathé on it, and it was a kind of a cool building, so I noticed it every time I walked by it.
So you don't know anything about this director, Russell Mack?
Did you look him up? Does he have an extensive
I didn't,
filmography?
but I can do it right here. He worked in vaudeville.
That's not a surprise, considering what we got in this film.
He was part of a vaudeville duo.
Oh.
And he also became a theater manager, or at some point was a theater manager.
Did he make a lot of movies?
He starred in almost a dozen productions on Broadway. He made a few movies in the early 30s, but not a lot. Apparently this, Lonely Wives, was based on something called Tanzenwaltz, a 1912 vaudeville act by a seemingly international group of people, Pordes Milo, Walter Schutt, and Eric Urban, the latter two clearly being German, but I don't know who Pordes Milo is.
Okay. It's a venerable property by 1931.
But obviously this vaudeville act has been developed into a full-blown farce plot. Very full-blown.
So it stars Everett Horton in a dual role. It also has Laura LaPlante in it, who we saw in King of Jazz, actually, in a brief scene. She was the one that was running the women's newspaper.
So, which one is she? Is she Diane, the main other female character?
Exactly.
She was
hilarious,
a lot
man.
of fun. Yeah, she was almost as funny as he was.
Yeah, her drunk act was non pareil.
She's also adorable, and also there's this scene where the two of them go out for dinner, where Horton is doing ridiculous sort of dementia version of trying to be bodily suggestive, or trying to not be bodily suggestive anyway, and she's like corpsing during the scene, and it's absolutely hilarious. What's her filmography like?
Big silent, and she kind of disappears in the 30s too, although obviously not because she's not a good actor and doesn't have a good voice, because she's terrific in this.
It just seems like just the fact of transitioning to sound, it brought a whole new wave of stars, and people who were up and coming during the silent era sometimes just got kind of lost in the mix, it seems like.
I think so. She was a big Universal star. She was in the Universal silent Showboat, the 1929 Showboat.
Oh yeah?
And I know she was in a lot of other things. She does get kind of a big build-up in King of Jazz. Didn't really happen for her. She was kind of out of movies by the late 30s, as far as I know.
So you really liked this movie.
Well, it was really funny.
Why don't you tell us what it's about?
I really love Everett Horton
Of course.
in general. Obviously, I got to know him primarily through Fred and Ginger movies first, but then everywhere you look, he's playing some great little or not so little role.
Well, he's in Devil is a Woman being hilarious.
Arsenic and Old Lace. He is in a bunch of Fox musicals in the 40s. You know, he's everywhere.
Now, Horton is not, I'll just say, before Dave tells you the plot, he's not trying for an Oscar here in this dual role. He doesn't actually make any attempt to move differently or to sound different. There's just a goatee involved. That's it.
That's the whole point, is that they really are the same guy.
Nobody can see the resemblance unless the goatee is added or removed.
So let's talk about his two roles. One of them, you know, the primary one, the one that we think we're going to be following the whole time. If you haven't read any kind of plot description, you don't expect another Horton to show up. This guy is a prominent New York lawyer his career is really taking off. He's bringing in more business every day, and it's kind of led to a nervous breakdown in the past, and there's always a threat of another one, and he has very peculiar habits. He is absolutely 100% all business during the day, we are told, but then at 8 o'clock, he switches into sex maniac mode and has to be kind of kept under lock and key.
He's already got a dual personality.
Exactly, and then we bring a third person in. Everyone's kind of indulgent of him. They really want to work around this character flaw he's developed.
It could veer into Me Too territory, except that his secretary is willing and wily, and also wiggly.
The butler is in on it. He's always commenting on...
Says something like, his mind is so active tonight.
Yeah, he's in bloom, and that means... watch out.
She's not worried at all. Pretty sure she can handle this, and she can.
The mother-in-law is another matter, however.
He can't handle her.
No, and she is very concerned. She really wants this marriage to work out. The wife has been away for her health, we're told, for 2 months. So this has been a real struggle, presumably, to keep this guy from committing infractions that are going to nullify the marriage all this time, when he can't control himself at all.
What I thought was interesting was the fact that despite their constant squabbling, she and Horton, mother-in-law, is played by Maude Eburn, a Canadian character actress of stage and screen known for playing eccentric roles. In this partial filmography, I've never seen any of her other films listed, although we probably will see some of them as we do studios year by year, except for I have of course seen To Be or Not to Be. Apparently she's in that.
You haven't seen Ladies They Talk About?
I might have.
Stanwyck prison movie.
Yeah. I was going to say that she and Horton actually seem to like each other a lot. Pals.
You know, old chummy adversaries, right?
Yeah,
it's a game they play between themselves. Trying to keep him from committing adultery.
Exactly. And he kind of wants to be kept from doing it.
Yeah, he loves his wife. He believes in the sanctity of marriage. This is not something that he has any control over, the script tells us. And everyone is willing to accept that and just deal with it. Everything is set in motion by this new secretary.
Mainly she wants to help out her friend.
She thinks that they can get a really great lawyer to take up this divorce case. That seems hopeless, apparently. Need top legal talent. They can't pay for it.
So Laura LaPlante is married to a famous vaudevillian.
Mr. Zero.
But he goes out every night and leaves her alone, but doesn't want her to go out every night, is their problem.
Yeah, she says she never knows if he's coming home or not. So if she wants to have some revenge sex with someone else, she might get caught doing it, which would be terrible.
He's unreliably unreliable.
Yeah. So we actually see a picture of him in the newspaper, too, and it's Everett Horton.
Yeah, so now we know something's up.
So an impersonator who looks like our main character, played by Everett Horton, somehow this is all going to come into play, you start to assume. Sure enough, it does. There's a double date that Horton makes with both the secretary and Laura LaPlante. And he says, you know, I don't know what's going to come of this. Maybe a threesome.
When I was in theater school, I actually wrote a farce. As a young playwright, I had been inspired by Joe Orton. I thought, well, it's time that I write a farce. I've never tried to write an outright comedy. And theater school is a good time to experiment. Something I knew from actually reading about film comedy, and particularly reading about Bringing Up Baby, was that doubling is one of the most important elements of farce. That and having a lot of bedroom doors that people can go into and out of. There is a meta scene, the one where Laura LaPlante is corpsing. There's a meta scene about that in this movie.
Talks about one of those plays where there's a man under the bed, the wrong man under the bed.
And this is the main area where all this takes place. His office. In his home office, there are 7 doors arrayed around it that people are constantly coming into and out of. Everything opens out of this main set.
Very nice centralized set, yes. We are told that he set up his home exactly the way he wants it. He loves his dining room exactly the way it is, even though his impersonator doesn't know where it is.
Other thing I know from reading about farce, and particularly reading criticism of Joe Orton's What the Butler Saw, and there's a butler seeing a lot of things in this movie, and seeing things that he's not sure exist. The principle of a farce, and this also applies to Bringing Up Baby in a completely different way, is madness, is to basically bring the formal elements of any kind of plot structure, comedy or melodrama, to bring them into such confusion that all of the characters lose their mind in a kind of Dionysian ecstasy.
And the butler, again, is our stand-in for that, because he screams at several points that he has completely lost his mind.
And this poor actor looks like he is physically and mentally falling apart. It actually wasn't funny. It was kind of painful to watch.
Well, but it is funny, too. And he really went with it.
Who is this guy? I've got to find out who this guy was.
Because he looks fairly well-groomed.
At the beginning.
Yeah. This is not just how he looked or anything. They clearly made him up or made him down to look this fucked up.
Spencer Charters. An American film actor who appeared in more than 220 films between 1920 and 1943.
I know I've seen him many times, but I can't really think of any specific instances.
He played on Broadway between 1910 and 1929, so this guy knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
And this is probably one of the best roles he ever had.
The big thing that happens is that Horton makes this double date. He has also been carefully scrutinized by the mother-in-law, who's particularly adamant that tonight he must not go out.
Right, and then Mr. Zero independently shows up in a fancy that coincidence.
The thing is, Mr. Zero, he's a famous impersonator, and the other guy, the lawyer, Dickie Smith is his name. He is becoming more and more famous as well, so Mr. Zero wants to add Dickie Smith to his gallery of impersonations. And so he comes looking for an endorsement. Horton number 1 says, fine, I'm happy to give it, but you're going to have to prove your worth by staying here overnight and impersonating me while I go out and take care of these peccadillos.
The other thing about a farce, and this is in my farce too, never produced, never even tried to get it produced. It was just a theater school exercise. But the other thing about a farce is people who are on travels coming home unexpectedly.
Of course. Throws a monkey wrench into plans. So that's always funny. It's not supposed to be a big deal. All this guy has to do is fool the butler and the mother-in-law. So he's got a kind of stage business goatee that he puts on.
Which is probably what Everett Horton is wearing.
Yeah, I'm sure he is. Got his hair parted a certain way. He just changes it a little bit. He spends like 5-10 minutes getting ready, and he's like, voila, look. Horton number 1 sees Horton number 2 and says, my God, you do look like me. This is crazy. A few other little things that he needs to impart to his impersonator, but mostly this guy, he seems to intuitively understand all of the facets of Dickie Smith's character.
And he already sounds like him, so that's a bonus. Also, Everett Horton, the man whose name you just have to say the full thing every time, he's already set it up with his mother-in-law that he has a cold and he's going to go to bed right away, so it doesn't seem like anything could go wrong.
No, it's a great crutch. If anything starts to get out of hand, you just cough a lot and drag yourself to bed, and no problem. And that's how the impersonator sees it. Now he's going to have a big new addition to his act. It's wonderful.
Actually, the best thing that this movie did, the most interesting thing this movie did, is how it fools the audience into thinking it's a lot naughtier and even nastier than it actually is up until the end.
I was kind of fooled.
The fooling of the audience is the most interesting thing that the movie does. I mean, in terms of sheer hilarity or originality of farcing, it's not any Bringing Up Baby, but that was kind of interesting. It is nasty. It's like a nasty sex comedy. That's the other thing about Bringing Up Baby being a farce. It's a pure farce, like The Importance of Being Earnest, because it's not about sex.
Yeah, it's a
Except in
sexual farce.
In the most abstract way, with dinosaurs and intercostal clavicle. Where does this bone belong? Where does it fit?
Yeah.
In the tail!
Yes.
It is there, but it's in a way that the characters themselves don't understand sex. Anyhow, back to this one where people understand sex very well, even though they can't talk about it.
Horton goes out and has his night on the town. I really like those scenes at the club where you've got some cool neon signs in the background, discussions going on about catching someone in flagrante delicto. Although he never says that. He tries to tease it out of her through a elenchus. So you have to catch them in, and then
he just makes these bizarre hand motions.
Yeah, but then she won't go along with him on it. Clearly, she knows exactly what he wants. Back at home, turns out the big surprise the mother-in-law had in store was that the sojourning wife is back from her travels unexpectedly, as you said. That's essential.
And the mother's main eccentricity, where she acts like she's crazy the whole time, is that also in an attempt to not talk about sex directly, she wants to get her daughter pregnant to solidify this marriage, basically. And whenever she brings that up, she just starts going, pitter-patter, pitter-patter, pitter-patter.
Grandchild frenzy.
After the secretary also shows up at this dinner, she talks about going to the whoopee club. There's also a great pre-code moment where the secretary, I guess they can't be roommates though, because her friend is married. Isn't there a moment where she's in the shower? And
they live across the hall from each other.
Oh, okay. And then they're conniving over all of this, like this night out or something, and she's in this crazy shower with this giant curtain.
You can almost see her breasts throughout the scene.
And they have a little kiss.
Yeah.
And it's nice. It's like titillating, but it's also nice because like they just really seem like such good friends in this movie. You don't get that often.
Great.
So her friend shows up at this night and says, oh, and there's no jealousy or anything. And she says, Diane has never been to the whoopee club. But then how does it happen that Diane ends up sozzled out of her mind, but her friend is fine the next morning?
Well, her friend clearly can hold her liquor a lot better than Diane. And
Diane really doesn't get out enough.
No, she doesn't. She's waiting at home for her husband who never shows up, or hardly ever shows up. Then it's a big blank after that. We don't know exactly what happens after that. We can guess, and the film wants you to guess. And maybe...
Well, and eventually we are told a version at the end.
Yeah, very much later.
The official version of what happened.
For most of the movie after that, we have no idea exactly what transpired between these three characters.
So what this movie drags out for the longest time, and these are things that could happen in another farce or nasty sex comedy, including some Shakespeare comedies, we're initially led to believe that the wife coming home to this is tricked into having sex with the wrong man, which could count as rape.
Yeah.
Right? Then afterwards, after we find out that that's not what happened, we are briefly believe that she has voluntarily committed adultery and maybe impregnated herself with this other man to have a hold on her husband. So actually, in terms of trying to get a hold on your husband, the two movies pair together nicely.
They do. The way it plays out is the impersonator tries fairly hard at first to get out of this tough situation. He says he can't even kiss her because he's got a terrible cold, which is a very plausible sort of matrimonial situation. And he just wants to get to bed if he can get away from her, but she just won't. She's all over him, and she's like, we haven't seen each other in 2 months. We need to kiss. I don't care if I'm going to get sick too. When it finally does happen, he just tries to wiggle out of it. He wiggles out of it, and then she gets a hold of him and kisses him, and then he's like, it's too late. So there he seems to lose control of himself as well, as far as the viewer is concerned.
And
we think that's it. He's on autopilot now. He must have sex with her, even though he knows that this is not right. He's not actually the person that she thinks he is.
And of course his wife is an implausibly young hot blonde too.
The number of amazing looking women dangling over Everett Horton in this movie is obviously part of the joke. I don't think it was exactly a secret to anyone that cared to know that Everett Horton was gay.
He always acts gay, though not quite at the levels of Franklin Pangborn.
No. He did play husbands in certain movies.
But his sissy mannerisms are especially hilarious in this would-be wolf role. It's almost like a one-man carry-on, where his leering is such a twisted meta-commentary on itself that it implodes or something.
He actually plays the husband in one of the great movie side couples of the 1930s in Holiday twice.
Oh, right, and of course he's wonderful.
Yeah, and that is kind of a model marriage where they do seem to really love each other and they have fun and they're both intellectuals. And
yeah, as a sissy bohemian professor, he makes complete sense.
Yeah.
Heterosexual.
in this movie, obviously, in the marriages that are plausible for him, the women are age appropriate. Actually, I noticed when I looked it up, he's exactly my age in this movie.
Oh, my
46.
word. 46 looked different then.
Well, he looks pretty spry in this movie. He's jumping all over the place. Got a good head of hair.
Is any of that real? It's no more real than the goatee, probably.
Oh, that's true. Who knows? Even if he did want to control himself or whatever, we find out later in the evening, once they go into the bedrooms that are adjoining bedrooms, they get locked in by the grandchild-crazed mother-in-law, so they can't leave. It's like a cage match.
And of course, the thing that for the longest time hangs in your mind as a giant, although you have to accept it because everything's a giant plot implausibility, but hangs in your mind for a long time as a giant plot implausibility, is why would his desire to add this impersonation to his roster be so great that he wouldn't confess rather than rape this woman? It doesn't make any sense why he would feel forced to keep this act up, especially since he could be shot or arrested or whatever afterwards.
But I think the movie does account for making you think that it's possible because of the way he reacts when he says, "That's it, it's too late, I've been activated." When she kisses
but that's
him,
that's terrible.
It is
That's
terrible.
terrible sexual politics.
I'm not saying it's not terrible, but it does give you that
Sure.
as it's not just that he's trying to keep up the imposture, it's that he really is attracted. That's why I was thinking, I don't know, somehow it was going to turn out that they were actually going to switch marriages completely.
Yeah, and that's why I was like, what? Because it makes, for the longest time, your mind goes to just the nastiest possible sex farce place.
Turns out none of that actually happened, but we'll wait to reveal that till the end of our discussion, because this is where the butler really comes
and
into
then
play.
The other thing that doesn't make any sense, which only is made sense of at the ending, is why the impersonator and imposter hangs around and rubs salt in EEH's wound forever. He just turns into this haunting devil, mocking devil figure, and you're like, why? What is going on with this character? And it all turns out to have a reason.
The amazing pile up of scenes where the butler keeps running into alternating versions of Everett Horton who are giving him contradictory commands about breakfast and coats and answering the door and getting money and
everybody's drunk and everybody thinks the butler is progressively drunker and everybody's drunk and everybody thinks they're going mad.
And obviously this is the kind of thing that can ring really hollow unless it's done perfectly, and to me, this is done perfectly. That butler...
A farce is as good as its farcers.
Real pathos there. I really started to feel sorry for him, sounds like you did too, but also it was hilarious. And Horton...
It was kind of painful.
Horton just barking at him and alternately being cajoling with him, depending on which version he is.
Well, he starts getting worried about him too.
Yeah, the impersonator is just rude to him constantly. He doesn't know him and doesn't care what happens to him.
Anyone knows what's going on, it's the impersonator.
Yeah, he just doesn't care about this butler's mental health at all.
They actually ultimately find a way to throw a French maid in the mix.
Which you need in a farce.
Absolutely.
Musette.
I didn't have one, I have to admit.
Well, you failed.
I know
Laura LaPlante, we catch up with her while all of this is going on. She's in a cab somewhere in New York City, just driving around. We find out it's a $50 cab ride, which in 1931 means, they've been driving, I think he says, we've been driving around for 9 hours.
Yeah.
Finally, he says, would you come to rest? Would you just ask me to take you somewhere? What the hell is wrong with you?
Lady, maybe I ought to take you to the police. And she's like, no, I don't know anybody there.
For her to still be this drunk after 9 hours means she really overdid it.
That can be safely said.
She can't exactly remember where Dickie Smith lives, but she figures that's the safest place for her because she can't come home in this condition. Her husband might be there and see her. So she's taken there eventually. We don't actually see the moment where she
figures out where he lives.
And she's brought in. She is really hilarious in these scenes. She won't go upstairs. She hangs over Everett Horton drunkenly. She wants some kind of solution to this problem, and there really is none. There's nothing that can be done for her right now. She just needs to sleep it off.
Well, so they hide her.
Yeah, that's the best they can think of, but she doesn't really want to do that until Musette takes charge.
We won't recap every last detail of this plot. Friend does show up for work.
Yeah, bright and early. She's not hungover.
And is happy to do another task for Laura LaPlante to get her home safely to her husband.
The taxi driver needs money. He becomes a constant looming threat out there, waiting for his $50.
There is a payoff to him sitting out there when Laura LaPlante manages to escape down a drain pipe that gives her ass burn, it seems like, and then is caught by him and brought back into the house.
There's no escape.
There's no escape from the madhouse.
From the machinations of this plot.
Ultimately, it is revealed that the impersonator has worked together with the wife to teach our hero a lesson.
And he is scared straight. He will no longer bloom. Or if he does, he will bloom only with his wife.
But yeah, there's a very long section of Everett Horton acting as a devil figure to himself, just hanging around for no discernible reason, leering at himself about having had sex with his wife.
Plot reason is that his coat is gone. He's trying to leave.
Well, that's from bringing a baby, too.
Yeah.
Get your clothes stolen so you can't leave. I think that's in what the butler saw, too.
He's got a house coat, but no coat. So he can't really escape, so he's angry. He's peevish, and he orders
That's not a good enough reason to just start rubbing in somebody's face that you've slept with their wife.
Good enough for this movie. He asks for some coffee and some White Rock. Do you know what White Rock is?
I have no idea.
So we looked it up. It was a popular mineral water of the 20s.
That's
restorative breakfast mineral water.
Mm-hmm.
I really like the stuff about the dining room. I don't know about you.
Whether the dining room had been moved? Sure.
Ultimate reveal. Everyone goes back to their original partner and seems a little bit happier with the whole arrangement than they had been before.
By the way, this ending is delivered pretty lightly, because it could seem pretty heavy-handed in its moralization, but it's just kind of just all tossed out there.
In comparison with Kept Husbands, it just feels very frothy and non-patriarchal, yes.
It's just a way to end it and relieve the audience's mind, as well as Horton's, from some anxieties.
And that's it.
As often happens with these little-known early movies, I didn't have the greatest experience watching them, but talking about them is highly enjoyable.
I thoroughly enjoyed
I know you did.
Both of them.
Steve is such a lowbrow, and you're also such a highbrow. Just wait till he starts talking to you about Angela Schenelec.
I'm not going to make any kind of argument for either of them as great films of the 1930s, but I'm really happy we watched them, and this is the kind of thing that this exercise of ours is going to turn out.
Well, I mean, we are trying to find hidden gems, and sometimes that happens, but sometimes the movies are interesting for other reasons.
You never know what you're going to get with the Hollywood studios year by year. Onward to This Week in Moviegoing, Elise.
So we're back in the saddle with our moviegoing. We're going to have some very heavy weeks coming up.
It's going to make editing a little difficult, but we will manage somehow.
We're going to be at the TIFF Lightbox all day for a few weekends, availing ourselves of the members' blue room, eating their corn chips and their little gluten dairy-free brownies, their free coffees, in their nice sunlit members' room to which we have access.
I could not ask for anything better than that.
This weekend we actually had to go on a trip farther out than we've ever gone before to watch a movie.
We went to see Clara It at the Fox Theatre, the oldest operating cinema in Toronto. It's out in the Beaches, which is about an hour transit journey for us. I had been there once before. I saw Comedy Short Compendium that was part of the Silent Film Festival when I actually covered it, the complete festival. I think it was 2013. But that was the last time I'd been. I was happy to see it still operating, still looks wonderful, still offering a very interesting variety of films, and we're going to have to start making it a more regular part of our itinerary.
Yeah, we're going to have to fold it in, as difficult as it is to fold anything else in. We had, by sheer fortuitousness, an interesting silent movie double feature. Two big names of the female names of the silent era. era, although the movies were quite far apart in date, representing two periods of the silent era. So Mary Pickford,
America's sweetheart, although she was Canadian.
In Lubitsch's Rosita from 1923, and then It was from, 1927?
Yeah.
And who was the credited director on that? Do you remember?
Uncredited was Sternberg.
Apparently, we never knew that before looking it up. Credited director, Clarence G. Badger. A silent director, presumably, of whom I know nothing. It was a very solid movie. It wasn't quite as good as The Wild Party.
I loved it. I loved both of them.
Did you like it more than The Wild Party?
I don't know. Probably about the same. I thought it was incredible. So let's start with Rosita.
I have never seen a Mary Pickford film before.
I'd only seen one before.
Actually, it was only when we fairly recently, like in the last year, watched that documentary on silent cinema.
The Kevin Brownlow.
Yeah, that I even knew, I knew about Mary Pickford as America's sweetheart, which is why I've avoided her films up to now. But I didn't know that she was a comedian. I actually didn't know that.
Oh,
and
really?
that made me much more interested. And also that she was a comedian who became such a big star that she started managing her career and wanting to branch out and do more dramatic and more artistic roles. And this is certainly one of them.
Well, she was one of the people right at the start of United Artists who had enough clout to set up United Artists as an independent releasing
And along
venture.
with her husband, Douglas Fairbanks, they became the first absolutely giant, to a degree that is unimaginable today, movie stars. They say this is obviously a movie designed as, like I said, I didn't know this was a Mary Pickford before it came up on the screen. With a lot of these movies at TIFF, the ones that are part of series where I decide to go to everything, I want to be surprised, and I don't even try to find out anything about the movie. All I knew was that this was a Lubitsch silent.
And it was a Film Foundation restoration.
Yeah,
That's it.
That's the series. We're pretty much going to that whole series, I think. But it's absolutely a Mary Pickford vehicle, and I didn't know that she brought Lubitsch from Germany to make that for her.
Handpicked.
So I guess his personality is not as, although of course he was making movies in Germany, his personality is not as dominant here as hers. It is a vehicle designed for her and to showcase her entire range. So there is the furthest outer reaches of melodrama. She is crazed. She is charming, she is grieving, she is loving, and she is comedic.
Favorite stuff was
The comedy stuff with her family, right?
and eating at weird moments as well. I liked.
It's a real smorgasbord of a movie, but I thoroughly enjoyed it
Yeah, me too.
and thought she was a lot of fun and that her persona was pretty darned interesting. I have wanted to cover her for our Acteur series, but she just made too many movies.
But we'll do actual episodes devoted to her, I'm sure, at some point. Here we're just gonna lightly go over it, and I guess we have now. It's set in Spain.
Seville, it was Seville.
Yeah, that's right.
He goes to Seville for
That's right.
Carnival. And there's a lascivious king.
He's a disgusting man. He has a terrible marriage, and he just does whatever he likes. He blooms all over the place, and nobody stops him.
But we don't need to spoil every movie we talk about.
No, that's just the setup. And he takes a liking to a young woman who is a street performer who makes fun of him. And then we'll just leave it at that.
And when she first appears with her guitar and her adorable little face, but being way flirtier. Well, this is another thing that I found interesting. This was one of her attempts to branch out from comedy and actually from playing child roles, which is what she was originally doing. She's certainly not like a child in this role.
No.
She was way flirtier and way feistier than I imagined Mary Pickford being, and so I wondered whether this went over with her audience or not, and apparently it was a gigantic hit.
Yeah.
It seems that her big claim to fame here, why she is such an amazingly popular performer, is that she has golden hair.
Yes. One of her signature attributes.
And I guess my big takeaway from the movie that doesn't involve spoilers would be that there is one scene in particular, late in the film, where for the first time we see that long golden Victorian hair, that pre-Raphaelite hair, all flowing down her shoulders when she wakes up in the morning in bed. I have never understood before the erotic charge of that Victorian maiden hair.
Oh, this did it for you.
I was like, holy crap, it's just so shiny and soft and brushed and insanely long. Deeply contrasting with Mary Pickford's stardom.
We hopped on the streetcar, went across town to the Fox Theater.
4 years later, we have the modern woman.
Yes.
Not the Victorian maiden, or even the Victorian urchin. America's new sweetheart, Clara Bow. It's interesting, because this is, again, only the second Clara Bow movie I've seen. It was very consonant with her persona in The Wild Party, and found it interesting what a deliberate contrast there is in the movie between her style of modern womanhood and the couple of Victorian remnants, both blondes, in the movie with her, although they're modernized Victorian remnants.
Society dame.
So her friend, her poor, stepped out of a melodrama, fallen woman friend with her little baby that Clara has to help her look after. Clara is, this is what I found interesting, there were all these queer undertones, or not even undertones, overtones, tones, in The Wild Party, which I thought that Dorothy Arzner had imparted, and I'm sure she did, but she's picking up on something that's already present in the Clara Bow persona, which is that she's this thoroughly modern, short-haired, competent, sexy, but unsentimental woman who can take care of herself and other people.
Feminine solidarity.
And she actually performs a rescue of her rival at the end of the movie. She performs the heroic rescue.
No, it was incredible. This movie, I can't believe I haven't seen it before. And as you say, we did our episodes on Dorothy Arzner. We did a long-form discussion of The Wild Party, and there we speculated that we saw traces of Arzner all over that movie that carried forward into the 30s films that we saw. And I think that's true, but yeah, we have to start thinking that maybe she and Clara Bow thought of all this stuff together and were in sympathy in how to tell the story of a modern woman. This is before Clara Bow ever worked with Arzner, and she's already in place as this character.
And in The Wild Party, there is sort of a framework of her character having to grow and learn and become a little more disciplined.
Well, yeah, because she's a college girl. She's a spoiled college girl.
Here she's a shop girl, and she's perfect from the beginning. She's a superhero. Not a Dietrich-style superhero, but her own kind of superhero, and the movie never finds her to be in fault or to be in any real serious kind of trouble that she can't handle.
I also really liked split male protagonists that you get here. You got one guy who's got a meta role talking about what it is.
And again, he is coded to be 100% gay.
It seems so, but...
Even though he is supposedly after Clara Bow, that's how she gets introduced to her boss on a social level. Her handsome boss.
Yeah, he is the one who actually has it, but isn't reading the newspaper stories about it. And this is all based on Eleanor Glynn's journalism at the time, or opinion column work.
Well, they call it a story, but it seems more like an opinion column in the form of a story. We don't know what the background to this is.
An analysis of modern sex appeal.
Yeah, and also celebrity, I guess.
To some extent, I guess, yeah. It doesn't necessarily, it could be someone that you just pluck out of the shop girl class.
Yeah, but that is exactly, Clara Bow was plucked out of much lower than the shop girl class.
Yeah.
And she had it, and that is exactly how you can become a celebrity.
We'll save our in-depth discussion for that, because this one we know we're going to get to, because Clara Bow, we are doing an Acteurist Oeuvre Review complete series on of all the movies that are extant, which will be a considerable number.
Well, possibly not all. We might choose to start after her career starts really taking off.
Well, once she becomes actually the central figure in her movies. Yeah, that's what we did with Jennifer Jones too. We didn't do the first two where she's just got small roles.
Yeah, well, we might drop about 5 Clara Bows, some of which probably don't exist anymore anyway.
Yeah, but that's coming up. Again, if you're keeping score at home, we're finishing up with Jennifer Jones next month. Then we're moving on to Setsuko Hara. That'll probably take us to the end of this year. Then we're doing Margaret Sullivan. That'll probably take about half a year. And then on to Clara Bow. So sometime in 2021, you can expect us to get in depth with Clara Bow's career.
So if, like us, you love women, you've got many years of listening ahead of you.
I can't wait to get to those movies. I like her more every time I see her. I really enjoyed the introduction by Shirley Hughes, who is the impresario behind the Toronto Silent Film Festival. She's been doing this for many years. years.
We are going to see as many of those as we can, as don't conflict with other series, and, we'll be talking about them in this section.
Yeah, it's a long-running thing that is a great feature of our city.
We also saw today, we saw at the Lightbox, the Naked SPUR. You definitely hadn't seen it before. If I had, I didn't remember it. It is supposed to be the Anthony Mann, Jimmy Stewart Western, right?
I have to say I agree.
It lived up.
Incredible.
Well, we haven't seen the others yet, but it's hard to imagine how this could be topped in terms of brilliance of casting.
It really surprised me by how good it was, because I knew that they were good, and I'd seen a couple of them, but this one does seem to have been on a higher level. It's interesting that this is the one, I think it's the only one that's not at Universal. It was made at MGM, but they just took their act over to MGM for one movie, and somehow it's even better.
It was very worthwhile watching this one after Bend of the River, which was good but not great, because you see him use the exact same plot again, but do it so well this time that you're actually fooled into not thinking it's the exact same plot.
You also get to see, I think, more clearly in this one than any of the others that I've seen, that Anthony Mann really didn't stop making noirs when he started making westerns.
Well, I think that's the consensus opinion.
Yeah, I don't think it hurts to say it. There is a lot of carryover between the way he approaches both genres.
We won't say much more about it or anything more about it, because this is clearly a movie very central to the Jimmy Stewart persona, and we will have to talk about it when we do our Stewart episode, our Stewart retrospective episode.
Coming in April 2020. Last movie of the week.
This was The Strange Case of Angelica.
It was made in Portugal in 2010.
By Manoel de Oliveira, who is, I don't know how old, 102, 104 when he made this? Master of the Portuguese cinema. This is why the subtitle of this podcast is Irresponsible Opinions About Classic Film, because we here like to admit our ignorance. We want everybody who is interested in film to be able to talk about film that they are interested in without being embarrassed by not knowing literally everything. And also not having to just regurgitate critical talking points about the filmmakers that you don't know anything about.
Or the filmmaking industries. This is my first Portuguese film.
Yeah, sure, me too. But at the same time, it's a delicate balance, because you don't want to just go barging into the work of a master of a cinema that you know nothing about and say, well, my first impression of this movie has any foundation in anything. So
no, you don't want to take us as a reason to see or not see a movie. You know?
But we would just like to be able to.
Just hear us out. We'll give you our reactions, but we are not experts in any way.
We are learning. This podcast is about us learning.
I thought this was a worthwhile thing to see, but I was not blown away by it.
No, and I did do a little bit of reading after we got home. I always try to, if I don't know how to feel about a film and don't know anything about the director, I do like to read a bit of criticism just to orient myself. And I did read a few articles, and it does seem to have had a mixed reaction, despite being in this Best of the Decade choice by TIFF's particular critics. In this series, some people have, even people who are very, very fond of his cinema and know a lot about it, have found it maybe to be a little flat or a little slight. So there's mixed opinion about it.
One thing that I thought about, I wonder if it had some kind of influence on Paul Schrader.
Why do you say that?
The way the films with the sort of flight with the ghost.
Oh, you know what? I did think about that in First Reformed.
Yeah, it looked...
What year is this from?
2010. So yeah, it very well could have been something that Paul Schrader was homaging with that.
Kind of shit he'd watch, for sure. End quote. I chose this film knowing nothing about the filmmaker because it is a genre that we both really love.
Yes.
Which is the falling in love with
dead person.
Dead woman. It's almost always a woman. Although we are going to go see The Ghost of Mrs. Muir soon, so it's not always a woman.
No, that's true.
And I didn't even know that. I just knew that it was about a beautiful dead woman who's magically brought to life by a photographer's camera. So you could kind of extrapolate from that.
Well, yeah, but she's not brought to life.
Well, that's how it was summarized. That's how it was summarized.
Yeah, she's dead the whole time.
So if you're going to it, there seem to be two ways to go to this movie, and I went to it the wrong way. People who were going to it as a quote-unquote meditation on cinema, which, by the way, I think is the most absolute bullshit phrase. People pull this phrase out of their asses just in order to justify glorifying any work of cinema that they can pin this on.
Yeah, well, just like a novel weaves an intricate tapestry or whatever. I mean, it's a way of saying nothing.
There's a camera in it, and the camera takes a picture that turns into...
motion.
That starts moving, and therefore it's a meditation on cinema. Like, shut up. Just shut up.
It is beautifully shot.
Sure.
Every frame is a picture in itself.
So if you go to it for that, people seem to be getting a lot out of it. Going to it as a man who falls in love with a ghost movie, it's not the best example I've ever seen of that genre, which has some very good examples, some of which we've talked about more than once on this podcast.
Yeah, because they overlap with time travel or because they just have come up in other ways. What I did think was interesting about this, not that I was taken with it or really impressed by it, but it's something that is in here, which is that this is certainly more the way things would go if you fall in love with a dead person. They never come to life. You never get to know anything about them. The audience never gets to have any sense of you developing a rapport with them because they are dead, and that's where it lies. You're just obsessed with a dead person.
Yeah, whereas usually with this genre, including Portrait of Jenny, a movie we've talked about in our extended podcasting history more than once.
Jenny wills herself into his life, and they do get to know each other.
Somewhere in Time, that involves the man traveling back in time.
He wills himself into her life.
By the way, which already has the theme that some people have found to be very profound in this movie, which is of a man who is obsessed with the past and therefore falls in love with a dead person.
Yes, although, and don't forget...
And who basically wills himself to die, which also already we found astonishing when we revisited Somewhere in Time after both not having seen it since we were like children.
Oh, it's a grim movie. Well, it depressed the hell out of me when I was a kid, in a good way.
It's a very haunting movie in that you really do experience that character's hopelessness. If I had never seen Somewhere in Time, I might have been more struck by that element in this movie.
They are on similar paths there.
But also in The Ghost of Mrs. Muir, which we'll be talking about next weekend. We're going to go see that at the Paradise. In all of these movies, they become a two-person dialogue. With the person from the past, the ghost, the person out of time, whichever one is the person out of time and the other. Yeah,
but that's the innovation of this movie. If you want to seek one out, it's that it thwarts that expectation and it keeps it one-sided the whole time.
I mean, the people, again, who are going to this as a meditation on cinema seem to think that it's something about the magic and charisma and elusiveness of the cinematic image. I can't actually have feelings about that, though, so...
No, me neither.
I can't really watch it that way. Now, I'm sure some critics would be absolutely horrified at comparing this movie to Somewhere in Time, because apparently this movie is an example of formalist perfection. I also don't know what that is. I wouldn't be able to recognize it if I saw it. It'll be interesting to talk about Angela Shanilak because she too is seen by people who admit that they don't comprehend what's going on in her movies, at least fall back on saying, well, but they're examples of formal perfection, or even she receives criticism for being too formally perfect. But...
Well, we loved all of those, so it's not going to be the same kind of reaction. This one...
So we're not going to be talking about them in that way.
No.
And you may, hopefully, listening to this, breathe a sigh of relief, or be like, I guess I'm therefore going to stop listening to you now.
Sure. I did find it quite funny when it wanted to be. It had some interesting little scenes of bizarre surreality.
Well, there's some...
The first scene is incredibly funny.
Of what was happening?
Well, the person shows up in the middle of the night at a photography shop, gets the woman up, and demands that they come in the middle of the night to photograph something.
You could see this in terms of falls victim to idolatry, basically, and that's why he's destroyed. Again, this is not something I can have feelings about watching the movies.
Because he seems to have some kind of a happy ending. He flies off with her spirit at the end.
Yeah, when we first meet him, he is looking at a picture of, I'm assuming this is a angel from Jewish iconography.
Yeah, he has wanted this from the beginning. He's been fiddling around with his shortwave radio. He's not involved in reality anyway, and he's taken out of it by the end.
He really doesn't care whether it's a Jewish angel or a Catholic angel. They seem to be perfectly interchangeable as far as he's concerned.
And that's what he tells the nun. He's like, I understand understand. You guys are Catholics. It's fine with me.
It was just so very, very minimalist. I mean, there were little enigmas about it. I certainly would not give up on this filmmaker based on this.
No.
Why do all these workers that he's photographing pose for him as they're going by? And then why later on, after the landlady talks about terrifying workers, why do the images turn into what she describes as they're hanging, I don't know, drying out on his photo line?
Well, presumably that's what he actually was shooting for, to try to capture them in mid-sledgehammer swing. Anyone would look scary if you photographed them doing that.
But then those pictures are juxtaposed with this peaceful, beautiful, beautifully composed doll-like dead woman. And
yeah.
I mean, a lot of this was very intriguing. It just don't know what it added up to.
Find out for yourself. Go see Strange Case of Angelica.
Very strange indeed. And that's it, I guess, for this week.
Next week, back to Jennifer Jones. So we're going to be talking about Good Morning, Miss Dove and The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit.
Only one of which we've seen before.
That's right. Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, I do recall it being a quite interesting film, but it is a movie where Jennifer Jones is not the central focus. It's Gregory Peck. So we'll see how that plays against the backdrop of all these movies that are so decidedly focused on her.
All right.
See you next time.